Hello and welcome to this new episode of the Eigen Values podcast. This is an audio version of the Eigen Values Substack that can be found at davidturver.substack.com. This time we look at the Climate Change Committee's latest demands for cuts to emissions, set them in a global context, and look at their economic viability. If you enjoy this podcast, please like, share and subscribe to receive more content. Last weekend, the Climate Change Committee drew attention to itself again by demanding we cut emissions by 81% from 1990 levels by 2035. Their letter to Ed Miliband came in response to his request for advice on what our nationally determined contribution, or NDC, should be at COP30 next year in Brazil. Apparently, pre-announcing the target now gives Miliband the opportunity to demonstrate what he calls climate leadership at COP29 later this year. It's time to set these commitments into a global context and test their feasibility against other recently announced data. Our World in Data helpfully produce a chart and data showing the progression of CO2 emissions over a long period, as shown in Figure 1. As you can see, the emissions for the world in total, and China in particular, have been growing significantly, and those of the UK are small by comparison and have been shrinking. In fact, per capita emissions in China exceeded those of the UK in 2014. In 2022, the latest year for which data is available in Our World in Data, the UK emitted 0.86% of the global total, and global emissions rose by 332 million tonnes of CO2, which is more than the UK's total emissions of 318.7 million tonnes. The IEA has published its estimate for emissions for 2023 and shows that global emissions grew by 410 million tonnes in 2023, again far more than the UK's emissions. These statistics make the claim of climate leadership look risible. The CCC's target of an 81% cut in emissions from 1990 levels by 2035 is another way of saying we need to cut 2022 emissions by 64% to achieve their target. In the unlikely event that the target is met, UK emissions would then be 0.31% of the 2022 global total. The UK's cumulative emissions since 1750 amount to only 4.4% of the global total. Whatever we do to reduce emissions is a rounding error in global terms and makes the CCC's claim to be informed by the latest science look ridiculous. The Climate Change Committee claims their target can be achieved in a way that benefits the jobs and the economy, and that the technologies needed to achieve it are available at a competitive price today. Investment in low-carbon technologies, electric vehicles, heat pumps and renewables needs to come now for this target to be achievable. The CCC appears blissfully unaware that the UK has the highest electricity costs in the IEA, largely because successive governments have followed their advice and installed many of these so-called competitive energy technologies. The Climate Change Committee repeated their 10 commandments in its recent progress report to Parliament. These are measures it believes should be taken to keep us on track to meet its target. They've called for decarbonisation of public sector buildings and is delighted that the government has announced plans to reinstate energy efficient requirements for rented homes. By coincidence, the government published its latest report on what it calls the Demonstration of Energy Efficiency Potential, or DEEP, a few days before the Climate Change Committee's latest missive. A team has installed a range of energy efficiency measures in a sample of 14 homes across the country. These range of solutions implemented include some low-cost measures like loft insulation and air tightness improvements, but also included more expensive ideas such as solid wall installation and combinations of measures. Figure 2, taken from their synthesis report, shows that the costs ranged from a few £1,000s for individual simple measures up to about £48,000 for more complex solutions. Note these costs exclude the installation of a heat pump and larger radiators. We have to delve into the more detailed case study report to understand the payback periods of the different insulation measures, as shown in Figure 3. The most cost-effective measure in the study is loft insulation with a payback period of about 40 years. However, all the other measures, particularly the whole house approach, have average payback periods of up to 3 or 4 centuries. The outlier spikes even show payback periods further away from today than the Roman occupation of Britain. The report does make clear that payback periods have been calculated using energy costs of about threepence per kilowatt hour for gas and 13 pence per kilowatt hour for electricity, both of which are roughly half the retail costs of today. But cutting the payback period down to only 1 or 2 centuries instead of 3 or 4 makes no practical difference to the economic viability of these measures. Moreover, the report also says that the projects were undertaken during the pandemic, which is prior to the recent inflationary surge, so the costs are likely to be significantly higher than indicated, pushing the payback periods back up again. The report acknowledges this problem when it says that these results illustrate that financial drivers for retrofits may not be particularly strong motivators, and that non-financial motivations for installing retrofits, such as improving comfort, addressing fuel poverty, and reducing peak heat, may be more compelling arguments for insulating the nation's homes. In other words, they want us to spend loads of money to feel better about ourselves, rather than because it makes economic sense. No wonder the Climate Change Committee want to begin with spending other people's money on the decarbonisation of public buildings first, because no one in their right mind would spend their own money on this stuff. These results also show why the government wants to force landlords to spend on insulation measures, because a rational landlord would install only loft insulation at most and leave it at that. These findings cast serious doubt on the modelling of the electricity system carried out by NESO in what's called Future Energy Scenarios 2024. As we can see in Figure 4, they assume that electricity demand will be cut by about 100 terawatt hours through improved insulation and behaviour change. By behaviour change, they mean turning the thermostat down by a degree or so. They expect people to spend of the order of £50,000 on insulation measures and heat pumps, with a payback time measured in centuries, and after all that spending, shiver in a colder house. NESO plans for the grid and generation capacity assume these totally uneconomic insulation measures are implemented and generate energy savings of around 100 terawatt hours. This saving compares to their plan for a total demand of between 600 and just over 700 terawatt hours across the industrial, commercial, residential and transport sectors in their pathways that achieve net zero by 2050. Clearly, their grid capacity calculations are underestimating the amount of real demand by a considerable margin. We can see that the Climate Change Committee has got its head well and truly stuck in the sand, or maybe an even darker place, unable to see the economic and social carnage imposed upon us by its own policies. Yet they want to double down and impose even more damaging measures in the coming decade. It's alarming that different arms of the government and policymakers are disjointed, with neither the Climate Change Committee nor NESO aware that the insulation measures being proposed make no economic sense at all. We discussed earlier that we're not on track to deliver the renewables capacity required to meet the existing targets to 2030 or indeed 2050. We're even further away from delivering the extra 100 terawatt hours of electricity required to cover the assumed savings that will never materialise. This makes it more likely that we'll suffer shortages, brownouts and blackouts. We're already paying through the nose for our electricity. Not being able to get it at any price because they've not built enough capacity will lead to social unrest and catastrophic economic decline. This is even more proof, if any were required, that the government's net zero plans simply do not add up. Thank you for listening. Please like, share and subscribe to this channel to receive more content or sign up at davidturver.substack.com.